All right, welcome everybody. So this is our 11th year of JVM Language Summit. How many people here have been to all 11? How many people here is the first one? How many people here have been to 5 or more? Okay, so we have a pretty good mix. So for the people who are new, welcome. It's a wild ride, strap in. It's going to be an even wilder ride this year because historically this has been a 3-day event, and we decided to do the experiment of compressing it into a 2-day event this year. So it's going to be a little bit more compressed. And then of course this year we got probably the best crop of talk submissions that we've gotten ever, which, you know, that's just how it goes. And so there's going to be a lot of really great talks the next 2 days. So this started out kind of as a lark. You know, we originally started doing this conference, you know, on a shoestring budget of like, well, let's get together some people working on JVM languages, and it's really turned into the high point of the year for a lot of the people that participate. And the reason that we do this is, you know, this is a prime opportunity for the people who are working on the JVM and people who are consumers of the JVM, building languages, building runtimes, building tools, to compare notes and talk about what's working, what's not working, what the pain points are. So this is an opportunity for us who are working on the JVM to learn from the people who are using it, as much as for us to talk about what we're doing and all the cool things that are coming down the pike. So it's a really great experience. The logistics, the restrooms are in the back corner. There should be continual coffee and tea, you know, on the stations out the side doors. Breakfast is served starting at 8 o'clock, and the building is open at 8. And if you haven't signed in and gotten your little registration badge, you can get that from Michelle at the back table, or Sharat. Sharat, raise your hand again. So anybody who hasn't gotten their checked in at the first break, just go over there. And there's, as usual, there's a goodie that we printed up this year. It's a hoodie. The artwork by our own John Rose. John is going to model it for us. It's what all the hackers are wearing this year. So at the first break, you know, go back and talk to Michelle or Sharat and get your goodie. There is a dinner event tomorrow night at Piatti Restaurant. The seating there is limited, so you need a dinner ticket. So if you don't have one, it's, you know, already in your in the badge that you got when you checked in. Talk to Michelle and see if there are any left. There may not be any left. And if you don't have one of these agenda cards, you should pick one up at some point during the day. Not only does it have the schedule on it, but it's also our feedback card, and we find the feedback really useful. So if you could fill out the feedback and drop it off at the back table before you go, that would be great. So the event is a mix of 45-minute talk slots, which are traditional conference talks, and workshops, which are sort of facilitated discussions. The workshops are dual-tracked, one in this room, one in the room upstairs. The subjects have been picked, and what we'll do is, when it comes time to do the workshops, we'll sort of figure out which is the slightly more popular, and we'll put that one in the big room, and we'll put the other in the small room. And we're also doing lightning talks, so if anybody wants to do a lightning talk, go over to that little whiteboard in the corner and write your name on it, and the lightning talks will be this afternoon at 4:30. So if anybody wants to sign up, just put your name up there. Speakers, if you haven't already filled out a speaker release form and you are willing to have your talk published on YouTube, you need to put in a release form. Alex, do you have forms? Okay, so Alex has forms in the back. If you're an Oracle employee, all your rights have been signed away years ago, so you don't have to worry about that. But if anybody does not want their talk put up on YouTube, it's not a problem. Just let us know. I don't want my talk published. So just a quick reminder for the audience, since these are 45-minute slots, and generally people come with a lot of material, we try to avoid peppering the speaker with questions during their talk unless they've explicitly said, feel free to ask questions during my talk. So if the speaker hasn't said that, please, you know, wait for the Q&A at the end. And then there's a lot of unstructured time during the lunch and during the workshops to descend upon the speakers and ask them more questions. And I think that's it for the logistical announcements, and so I will hand it over to George Saab to do the, and now a word from our sponsor department. So take it away, George.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. Thanks. Very pleased to be back and have the opportunity to welcome you to this beautiful Oracle campus. We're really excited to have this event again. I think for many of us, it's really sort of the high point of the year. And we're going to, as Brian says, have lots of great technical content coming up. But first, I get to say a few words. And so what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about some sort of mechanical stuff, basically some of the work that we do and the thinking we do about how we're making this technology available. And this is something that, sooner or later when you're working on some kind of project or product that you want to have people actually use, you sort of run into these challenges and issues. And so basically, as you probably noticed, we've done a lot of thinking and some revision over the past few years in how we deliver Java and the JVM. And this is, despite how it may seem, not some random thing we come up with. It's actually something that we think through as deeply as we can and try to understand what are some of the benefits going to be if we want to make a change, and what are some of the challenges going to be. And so I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. So I think many of you are probably aware of what the release model has looked like for Java for many, many, many years. Basically, in theory, there's sort of a 2-year cadence, right, where every other year there's a major release, and that for Java means that there's a change to the APIs and the specification. And so basically, that's something that people have typically experienced as a big bang, potentially disrupting event. Now, of course, we have spent many years trying to make sure that those are that there's as little disruption as possible by doing things like having a formal specification, having extensive tests to try to make sure that when we change the spec, we are making it possible for code to move forward and not be broken. And I think on the whole, we do a pretty good job of that. Now, as you can see, this is sort of a theoretical model, right? There's year 1, year 2 here. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Now, as Oracle got involved, as the new steward about 8 years ago, we actually went out and asked a lot of people who use Java what they wanted to see. And we had, you may remember, gone through a period where it had actually gone quite a bit longer between major releases. And so we were interested in what users actually wanted to see. And we found, probably not surprisingly, that there were really almost 2 camps. And one camp was a lot of developers who felt like, wow, Java, man, I haven't seen anything new in that for years. Is it still around? Is it the new COBOL? You ask them, and I joke because we all know how many people are actually still using COBOL. But in any event, the crazy thing was a lot of these folks said, you couldn't release fast enough for me. I'd take new stuff every month if you had it for me. And we kind of laughed and said, okay, that's great, thank you. And then we spoke with the people in the boardrooms of large companies and even smaller companies who basically said to us, we think Java's great. We've used it for years, it's really stable. And we like that it's stable. We like the fact that it doesn't break us all the time. And so, interestingly, you have these sort of 2 camps, almost at odds with one another, often within the same companies, where some people want a fast rate of change and innovation and new things being made available to them, and the others basically just want everything to stay in stasis forever. Now, of course, neither of these extremes made sense at the time, and so we did probably what was the most sensible thing, which was we said, okay, we're going to keep doing things the way they've been done. And so we did that. At the time, Java 6 was the version that was out. Interestingly, what we found was that we were not only doing these major releases, but you may remember that we also had minor releases, that is to say, releases which didn't change the API and spec. And in fact, those were coming out fairly often. They were coming out on about a 6-month tick, and in fact, what we decided to do was to regularize that a little bit. So we were going to keep the 2-year cadence with updates in between on about a 6-month cadence. And now I haven't even talked about the quarterly security updates, which really are just about trying to make sure people stay secure, that vulnerabilities that we found or that have been reported to us are dealt with swiftly. But these are sort of the releases that people are used to. Now, interesting question here. 6-month releases, these are minor. How does that work with the JVM? Anyone know? Anyone remember 6U10, I think it was? Yeah. So these releases, while minor from the perspective of the Java API and spec, were not necessarily always minor when it came to the JVM. In fact, there were sometimes pretty major changes that were made to the JVM, even in these minor releases. And we were able to do this in part because of all of that testing I was talking about. Right? So basically being able to make sure that we weren't going to break the whole world who was using Java just because we were actually continuing to move the JVM forward. Okay, so that was great for the JVM. I'm going to give you an example of what these releases looked like in real life. So as an example here, we had a somewhat wild naming scheme where basically each of these minor releases were an increment of 20, so 8U20, 8U40, 8U60. And then we actually had plans as we were coming up on 9 to change that and make it a little bit more sane naming with 9.1.2.3. Okay, that's cool. There's a bit of a challenge that you get into when you have these kinds of releases that are fairly far apart. And anyone who's been following the industry and sort of, been thinking about agile development and that kind of thing knows exactly what I'm talking about here, right? Which is this kind of release model basically begs people to ask you the tough question, okay, great, that release that's coming in 2 years, what's in it? Oh, okay, what's in it? All right, well, we're releasing something now, and then we're gonna be starting on this next release, and before we've even started on it, people want to know exactly what's in it. And of course, that tends to be sort of a recipe for disaster, because basically, before you've even figured out how you're going to solve a tough problem, people want to know that you're going to solve it and how you're going to solve it, and want that all committed. And that's in a world which is changing in many ways. The makeup of the people working on it may change. The nature of the problem you may learn more about. And in fact, the industry may change in a way that demands that you do other things. And so that's kind of crazy, right? So this is typically what happens then, right? You have this choice. I'll replay that just in case anyone missed it. Hold on. Let's get back here. All right, so here we are, nice theoretical 2-year cadence, and then we find out that in fact, actually doing modules well in a way that works well for people and makes it easy for them to upgrade was harder than you thought. And you want to be able to address that and not force something down people's throats that is not right. And so what you do is the sensible thing, which is you let it slide out a bit. And notice that not only does that release move, but everything following moves. And so essentially what you've done is, in the interest of trying to do things right, and making sure that you have something that works well for the community of people who are using it, you actually end up delaying putting innovation in the hands of people who want access to it. And this effect is not only about those major things that are going in that are causing this kind of delay, it's also about all of the other things that you want people to get access to. And in fact, for Java 9 in particular, this was very interesting because I think we had on the order of over 100 JEPs in Java 9. Many of those things were small, but many of them were also very useful. And many of them were done long before the dates where 9 was originally going to be shipped. And so essentially what this meant from a language designer's perspective, from a platform designer's perspective, is your users couldn't get access to the innovation that you were doing because of one thing that held it all up, because of the way that the model works. And this we felt was kind of unfortunate. I think it also is something that, you know, could threaten leading to people's perception that, you know, that innovation in Java is slow, that I'm not getting new things, you know, what's going on with this technology. And the crazy thing, of course, was those features were done. They were done, they were good, people wanted to use them, they just weren't able to be packaged in a way that people could consume. So, okay, so what do we do about this? Well, we looked at it this way, right? So basically, we decided, after talking with many, many people, that we wanted to try having releases every 6 months. And now keep in mind, we've been doing 6-month releases already. Some of those 6-month releases had major changes, like totally major changes to the JVM. The only change here is, will we allow ourselves to make changes to the APIs and the specs in those 6-month releases? And there are really a couple of challenges to this. One was, of course, the JCP process, which was put together at a time long before any of this, long before OpenJDK existed. In fact, it was put together at a time when the big challenge was forcing corporations that were developing primarily in closed source to be transparent about what they were doing early enough for people to be able to give feedback on those plans. Right? Closed source needed transparency. The JCP rules forced that transparency to happen so that the right things could occur. Well, of course, the world looks very different now. Right? With the development being done in OpenJDK, people can see what's happening. You can go and see the discussions at the design time. You can see the changes to the code as they're happening. You can make your own builds or get builds that somebody else has made and test things out and give feedback early. And so, of course, it's a very different world. And so what we did was reached out to the folks in the JCP EC and had a discussion about what can we do in order to try to make it so that the overhead of the JCP process isn't the thing that's forcing the time between these releases to be really long, right? And I think everyone was very, very eager to try to help find ways of doing that, and we managed to, such that basically we were able to make that no longer be the bottleneck. So second challenge, actually our making sure that we could test these things and know that we were not going to be breaking people. So here, of course, with all of the testing that we have, that helps a lot. But it also required a little bit of a change in mindset. And what I mean by that is this. When you are developing a feature and you know that it's going into a release that's potentially years away, you have a temptation to try to push it into the mainline quickly so that you can get lots and lots and lots of time on testing. Bake time, as they call it. And so what we realized here was that if we were going to move to a model where we were releasing more quickly, things could not be coming in that were not ready. So we basically got everyone to commit to the idea of doing more extensive testing before things went into the mainline, doing late binding of features, not promising 2 years in advance that something was going to be in a particular release, but basically only promising at the time that, you know, we feel this thing is completely done and ready, it's tested, it's ready to go in. In fact, we've been, you know, pushing out builds and we've gotten feedback from a lot of people that it's right. So basically, what does that allow us to do? Well, it allows us to go from the 2-month major release to 6-month, and in fact, of course, you know, we haven't somehow magically created 2 years of work in 6 months. So the intent is these releases are small. They're quite a bit smaller. In fact, if you look at the size of 9, I think I mentioned there were over 100 features. In 10 and 11, I think in 10 there were 12 JEPs, and in 11 there's something on the order of 17. So substantially smaller. And so instead of major releases, we are calling those feature releases, right? Indicating that these are not intended to be some kind of big bang. It's intended to be something where there's a smaller but more constant flow of innovation that's being made available to users. And in keeping with the fact that this can have changes, primarily additions to the spec and API, you know, we're using the convention of calling those new version numbers of Java. So that's how we got from 9 to 10 to 11. Okay, that sounds great. That's cool. Developers like the fact that they get access to innovation more quickly. What about those, folks in the boardroom who are now worried that this is just going to be too much churn and too much change? Well, the good news here is there are plenty of software projects out there and software products which have solutions for this that we could look at and learn from. Most notably, I would say, in a lot of the Linux community, you have something where you basically, every once in a while, have a release which is called an LTS, long-term support release. And basically what that means is updates will be available on that line for a long period of time, right? So you don't necessarily need to move forward if you have something that you want to just remain stable and just get security performance and stability patches. So here's how that looks when we look at it in context, right? You've got a bunch of these smaller releases, and then every once in a while you have an LTS, which has many years of support. And in fact, if we look at the way that the model looked before, start to see an interesting thing, right? Which is the LTS releases resemble in many ways the major releases of the past. The difference being that now there are releases in between that we can get access to that not only can have major changes in the JVM, but can also have major changes in the spec and APIs. Okay. And just to make it a little bit more complicated, we also have a transition which is going on where basically Oracle last year said we were going to do a few things. One thing is we would start producing OpenJDK builds ourselves and making those available. And the second thing being that we had a bunch of closed source features which we would push to the OpenJDK. And basically our goal being that the difference between OpenJDK and Oracle JDK is simply the license, right? We want them to be interchangeable from a functional perspective. The point being that we want people to be able to take the latest OpenJDK build and be able to use that in development, and then at the time they're going into production, know that they're going to have options for how they're going to handle long-term support if they want to keep that workload running on the same version for years and years. And so this sort of shows that. And here's the part that I really like, which is if you separate these, then you can think about it this way. As a developer, I'm looking at the top line, which basically is a constant pipeline of innovation. And if I'm somebody who's sort of on the corporate boardroom side wanting to know that there's stability, I know that I'm going to be able to get many years of support. And I should point out here, by the way, this is just showing what Oracle is doing in this space. There are obviously other companies who are offering long-term support. And there's also long-term support in OpenJDK as long as people show up and want to participate in that. So this I think is pretty good. The crazy thing about this is many people that I've shown this to who are not sort of immersed in the Java ecosystem have commented to me that this kind of looks like a normal sort of open source business. We never really could understand how things worked before, and this is so much clearer. And so I'm sure many of you will give me feedback on that one way or the other, and I welcome those discussions. All right. So I mentioned that we pushed a bunch of things from Oracle JDK to OpenJDK, and this is just a short list of those things. As you can see, this is still a work in progress. Our goal has been to try to get to the point where there was essentially functional parity with 11. The challenges in different areas are different. Some things are basically work that we've done that we just needed to decide we wanted to make open. Some areas which have been different in the past are more complicated because they've involved third-party technologies that are not ours to open source. But this will give you an idea, and I know some of the folks who have worked on some of these areas are here, notably ZGC. Flight Recorder is something we're also very excited about. I think that becoming open source basically will take away something that's been a bit of a hindrance in the past for people wanting to consume that data, feeling like they weren't sure whether they wanted to commit to that. I think with it being open source, we're going to see a lot more of that going forward. So Final thing, I just want to mention, a couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of being in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and launching a new offering. And so this is the corporate shill part of the presentation, by the way. The other part was not. So this is basically reflecting this kind of shift and understanding the way that people want to be able to get access to support. So if people want commercial support, what we've done is gone from a model which was a perpetual license plus support to one that is a support subscription. And just to give you an idea of what things used to look like, if you went to the Oracle website in the past, you would have seen the list price for the Java SE Advanced perpetual license started at $5,000 a processor. The monthly subscription is $25 a processor, and that's the starting price. That's if you just want one. If you want a few, the price starts to go down very rapidly. And in fact, using it on the desktop, it's $2.50 is the starting price and goes down from there with volume. So again, what we're trying to do here is basically give people a reasonable option that they can come to and subscribe to support. Also keeping in mind, as I said before, you have lots of options for support, including staying with OpenJDK, including staying with Oracle builds of OpenJDK and moving forward quickly with the 6-month releases. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say this morning. Again, I'd like to welcome you heartily to the Oracle campus and to JVMLS. Very, very excited that we're now entering our 2nd decade of JVMLS, and I hope you all enjoy it and get the most out of the next few days. Thank you.